I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas Legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas Legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with guest John Barker, my, of course, regular co-host on the show. That's him to my far right. And in between John and I is Dan Hawkins, and Dan's representative from the 100th District. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
And you just come back from the legislature. I know you guys are on your way home. You've been working through, this is the 95th day, and you've been working, and thank you for taking time to stop by the studio and give us the information on the update. So, John, let me begin first with you. What's going on this week in the legislature? Well, now you're into the special session, aren't you?
We're in the veto session.
Veto session, okay.
And we've passed the 90 days, which is our normal statutory requirement. But of course, our requirement is to have an appropriations bill and a bill that would pay for it. Of course, we're under a mandate from the Supreme Court to get a school finance bill, and we're still working on all three. There's still three out there. But it has been an interesting week since the last time we spoke. We started out Monday and Tuesday looking at some tax bills. We've run a few bills on the floor. Today was an exciting day. We went in early, and there was an original motion that we can talk about a little later that the minority leader brought to bring the school finance bill up. It was defeated. I had two bills above the line. One was on consumer protection, adding military as a special class for protection. The minority leader brought an amendment, a gun amendment, to that.
A gun amendment to the consumer protection?
Yeah, a little unusual. I challenged his germaneness of it. He and the rules chair made a ruling. In fact, even the Democrats members on the committee agreed with the rules chair that it was not germane. Then the minority leader challenged the rules chair, which means you need 63 votes to overturn that decision. Under our rules, then the minority leader appoints someone, and the majority leader appoints someone to debate it. I was chosen by the majority leader to debate my side.
All right.
Which was, as a former rules chair, I thought I had a pretty good read on it. I explained it to the caucus. The other side had theirs. We prevailed with 77 votes, I believe it was. They needed 63. And that part was all about politics. It wasn't about legislation. I don't think he thought he could win. But I'm sure it'll be in the paper that he brought it up. But with that, then we passed a couple of very good bills. We put an extension of time, allowing an additional time on the amusement park bill that I talked about some weeks ago,
right,
about the safety factors, because the Department of Labor could not implement it by July 1, so we've kicked it down to January of next year. Of course, you may have heard about the tragedy down in Wichita, where a little girl was electrocuted by a carnival.
Did hear about
Tragic.
that.
She passed away,
Absolutely.
I understand, this morning.
Man.
But other than that, we passed a couple of other bills. We're busy. I know Dan and I have been in meetings for the last few days, 3 or 4 times a day on the tax question. And I'm sure Dan's got something to say about that, and we'll get into that. But overall, we're moving, and I anticipate, I was optimistic a few weeks ago that we were going to be out. We're not out. I wish we were. But we are making some progress. And the Senate, again, came in this morning at 8 and left at 8:30, and we worked till the afternoon, and we always look in the hallways for a senator, but it's hard to find one.
Can't find them on Friday.
Am I correct, Dan?
You are absolutely correct. It's amazing how we're there to get the people's work done, and the Senate seems to decide to leave.
So. Doesn't seem to be urgency for the Senate, I guess. But the things that you're working on right now, of course, you got to get a budget, and in order to have a budget, you've got to figure out the school finance.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And then on top of that, you've got an appropriations bill.
Right.
And then there's the taxation questions, of course. And then what about the health care?
Okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Healthcare is pretty much out of the question now. That's, we went through all of that debate. Medicaid, of course, came up and it was ultimately vetoed by the governor and sustained by the legislature. So Medicaid expansion is really off the table now. Doesn't mean it couldn't come up somehow through some procedural moves, but probably not going to. We're pretty late in the session now to try to bring that up. And besides that, the cost has went up exponentially since we talked the last time. Now, if it would have happened, it'd probably be close to $500 million in spending.
Wow. I know last time we were here, Representative Barker was talking about the fact that had we have adopted that proposed bill, there would have been about $450 million is what he was, what you were saying, additional money that
Yes,
would have
sir.
been needed.
About actually $464.5 million to be exact.
Wow, that's a ton of money.
Yep.
Well, what we're gonna cut away. We'll take a break. When we come back, well, Dan, I want to go over some of the pending legislation with you, and you and Barker just fill us in on it, and you and John just fill us in.
Good.
Thanks for watching. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Barker from the 70th District, Dan Hawkins from the 100th District. Now, Dan, I know you're just coming back because John Barker was just ahead of you a little bit, and he came in, and then he said you were about 10, 15 behind. That was pretty close. And you came on in. So update us in regards to what you've been working on this past several weeks in the legislature.
Well, biggest thing right now, Doug, is trying to come up with a tax bill to, cover the spending that we have. And that's really the challenge that we have. We've got the school finance that you talked about. We need to have the mega budget, the 2-year budget, but we need to have a tax bill that we know that can pay for all of that spending. And so over the last couple of weeks, John and I have been working with a group of Republicans to come up with a tax bill. There's been some other tax bills out there. So far they've failed, and so we're trying to come up with one that we can get 63 votes. Our job up there is to find a plan that we can get 63 votes in the House, 21 in the Senate, and the governor to sign. So far, the stuff that's been proposed has not been able to get the governor's signature, which makes it to where you have to try to override, and then if the governor's veto is sustained, we start from scratch. So John and I have been working with a group of people to come up with a plan that we think that we could get those 63 votes, and that's what we've been really working on diligently so we can finish up this session.
But we also want, with those 63 votes, we can't override a veto. We know that.
Right.
But we want one that we have the governor's involvement in, that he will likely sign, because we have 3 branches of government.
Right.
The legislature can do so much, as long as but you've got to get the approval of the executive branch. Just like on the school finance, we're going to have to get the approval of the other branch of government, the judiciary branch.
Right.
So it's not all in our ballpark, but we're working with the executive branch to get the budget, and we want a budget that will be signed. So go ahead, Dan.
And that's really the difficult part. So we've heard a lot over the last year, 2 years, actually several years, about the pass-through income exemption and how that's affected the state. The governor really has signaled that he understands that that's probably going to get repealed, so he's prepared for that. Now we just have to be able to put the rest of the pieces together to get the spending. So far, what we've had, Doug, is tax bills that would produce about $1.5 billion in spending, about $700 million a year, which gets some people, but it leaves another segment out. So we have to find that combination. And what we're really working on now is somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million over the next 2 years instead of $1.5 billion. So we're getting close. There's still a lot of things happening to try to find that perfect combination. We've got this last week, actually not this week, but last week, we passed a landmark piece of legislation where we brought 7 pieces of sales tax exemptions back onto the books. We have $6.4 billion in sales tax exemptions out there per year. And you would think we could find plenty of money in that. It's hard. And the reason why is because all of these special interests come in and start attacking whenever you try to bring theirs in. Well, we actually passed through the House a piece that produced about $58 million worth of sales tax exemptions that'll be brought back in to where sales tax will now be paid.
Yeah. And we've also proposed, and I know we've talked about it, introducing a bill that would put a
Sunset.
on all of the sales tax exemptions 3 years down the road, so that each of those agencies or whatever they are that come in and re-justify why they need a sales tax exemption.
Yeah, because that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
What'd you say,
6.4
$6.4 billion.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks ago, I did propose in tax the sunset provision. That bill is being worked on right now by the revisers. I've got to read through it and give them the okay. But it would, like Representative Barker said, would bring that 6.4 billion back. And during the next 3 years, each of those groups would have to come in and justify and get, all of the legislature to vote to renew their sales tax exemption. It'd be a really good exercise in making sure that those are really proper exemptions, what we really need.
Yeah. And I remember last week when John was in, he was talking about that they were working on a plan for $60 million.
That was the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ended up coming down to 58.
58. Yeah.
We had one piece that was stripped out during, through an amendment, was stripped out during the process.
Okay. And then so that, for the person who doesn't speak the language that you guys are talking about, when you talk about we got to get 63 people is our target, does that include Democrats that agree with the position, or is it just on a party line?
No, 63 total votes.
Whatever,
Right.
Whoever they.
But we've also got to work with the Senate. We don't want to pass legislation that's just going to go to the Senate and die.
Yeah.
So we're always speaking across the hall, as we call it, to our fellow members, senators, when they're in, about what we're proposing, and to see what their read and what their vote count is.
Okay. So and then you have to balance that. It's kind of like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, John, when I said, well, does the governor have input? Do you get information, or is it just in a vacuum and you adopt it and then the governor says no, and then you have to start over? But it's not. It's actually you have input to where you have perimeters or general concepts?
We run the flag up and tell their office, this is what we're looking at. Where would the governor be at on this issue? And I know Dan does it on a number of health issues.
The leadership of the two bodies right now is probably in daily contact with the governor, letting him know exactly what we're working on, what his feeling is. So there's kind of a give and take. Now, he won't come out publicly and say, I'm going to support this or I'm not going to. He allows us to do our work, but we want to know where he's at so we can kind of hone things, narrow things down to where we can get something passed.
Yeah, and I suppose that now that we get to this stage here where you're 95 days into it, there's apparently some sense of urgency, at least on for the district you guys are in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest Dan Hawkins from the 100th District, and of course John Barker from the 70th District. And John, while we were on break, you were talking a little bit about committee reports. Can you give us some conference committee reports?
Right. We've been meeting in conference with the House Fed and State, along with the Senate Fed and State. We've come up with a couple of different conference committee reports. In fact, I ran a bill on the floor this morning, House Bill 2102, that we had conferenced on. It was a simple bill. You never say simple. Never say simple. Giving county commissioners the authority to pick what days they want to meet. By statute, they were to meet on the first Monday of each month. Well, very few of them, as you may know, do not do that.
Right.
So we changed the statute to allow them to make by resolution decide when they want to. It passed the House 124 to 1. Mm-hmm. Sent it to the Senate. They amended it and added what we call a regional library bill, which allowed the governor to appoint members to the trustees of the regional libraries, and there's 7 in the state. It relieves him of that responsibility and allows those county commissioners to appoint those members. A little bit more local control. We ran it on the floor. I did what we call a concur, which I agreed with the Senate amendments. It passed today. I don't know, it was 124.
It was a lot, yeah.
I don't think we had a no vote, 117 to 0. But we've met on we've got the Women's Right to Know bill that the House has passed. The Senate didn't get to it. We went into committee, stripped out a Senate bill, and put that bill into it, the contents. We've passed it out, but I've got to do what we call an agree to disagree. That's a new term for us. Means that not all members on the conference committee are agreeing to sign the conference committee. So if I go back and do a motion to agree to disagree, if it passes, then only 4 members of the 6-member conference committee needs to sign the conference report, and then we'll run on the floor, and I think it'll pass. We've got a couple other conference committees meeting. Dan does a number of conferences during session. Many of mine are at the end of session after the other committees have closed down. So we're working on that. But Dan's been busy doing a few other things. Dan?
First, I want to ask you, you think you can get that agree to disagree?
Yes.
We've had a problem in our
I
house
know.
Being able to get that.
I am pretty persuasive.
You are. It's a simple procedural
motion.
but man.
We had one recently that got failed because they got they were tied up on the issue, the underlying bill. And it's not about the underlying bill. It's just, if we don't do that on a procedural vote, the Democrats, who have 2 members on the committee, will just say no to everything, and those bills would die. And you're letting the minority rule. So we have a procedure that if the minority members say no, then we do an agree to disagree procedurally. We go around them, and then only 4 members of the 6-member conference committee. In past years, it's very common. We have a number of new members this year that were not familiar with that, and to be honest, it wasn't explained to them properly. I go up there and I'm very cautious. I'm back to 5th graders or 4th graders. I tell them everything that's going on, and I do that in committee, which is helpful. But yeah, I think I will get the agree to disagree. We'll sign the conference committee report. We have to go back to conference again, meet, sign the report, and then kick it out. So it's an interesting way.
Well, let me ask you, John, about this women's right to know. What's that?
I'm going to let Dan do that.
Okay.
It's a health issue, and
All right.
Well, every year we have something in this vein come up, and this one's really nothing more than a disclosure law to make sure that women who are going to or are contemplating an abortion have all of the information in the proper sequence to where they can make a good decision. That's what this bill is about. Now, there's some technical stuff to it, but really it's just making sure that they have the proper information before they proceed forward.
And also, you go to some of those clinics that do that type of procedure, they have a list of 3 or 4 doctors. The lady that's getting the procedure does not know which of those doctors are going to conduct the procedure until right before the procedure. And we want them to have that knowledge and information before they do the procedure. If you go if you go to a surgeon, you meet your surgeon before you have a procedure. I mean, I've been in those situations, but you want to meet him. I want to make sure he's having a good day.
Right.
If he's going to do something like that. So that just allows them to have that additional information. So instead of just 4 names and they'll circle one as you go in of who's going to do the procedure, you've actually met and had a conversation with.
It also discloses to them if there's any problems in that physician's background.
Right.
So if there's been some disciplinary procedures or something, that they have the ability to know that, and maybe they want to choose a different physician to do that.
Okay. And are there age limits on that for the women's right to know? I mean, does it?
No, there isn't. If they're having the procedure.
So you could be 17, less than the age of majority, and that still applies?
It does.
Okay. All right. And what about guns? The guns is always, there's something going on with guns every session.
We had a gun bill come to actually the health committee originally, and it was a bill to exempt KU Med Center from having to have the security and all of the stuff that's required by our current law. Gun bills are not something that the healthcare committee usually tackles, and so I asked that to be shifted to John's committee to Fed and State, and he's taken it from there and been working that issue pretty much all whole session.
And we're in negotiation with the NRA. We'd like to have less resistance. The Senate is also very involved, and they tried to get a bill out. It came out of committee. They tried to run it on the floor. It got amended and amended and amended, and finally they sent it back to committee. So I would anticipate we're going to have that discussion within the next week or so. In fact, when I was debating, the minority leader this morning on his amendment about guns, and I gave him some assurance that we were in negotiations. He wants to debate it on the floor, and so do I. And we're going to get that opportunity. It's just today was not today.
And there's just a lot going on there. We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker from the 70th District, Dan Hawkins from the 100th District. Now, I know you've told me before, John, and I'm sure, Dan, you would agree with this, that in order to get anything put together, we've got to start with school finance. And so if you're watching this at home and you want to say, I want to go see what's going on with that bill, what do they need to do?
Yeah, the bill was just introduced last week, Doug, and it's substitute for House Bill 2410. It is the proposed school finance plan. You can go to the legislative research. Of course, next week we'll probably have more information on it when we do a show next week, if we do a show next week, if we're not locked up in Topeka.
Right.
We'll have that information available, and we will surely discuss it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for your work that you put into the legislature. This is, you know, it's interesting to hear. I've learned so much from just being on this, and I hope you have it home. So thanks for watching Legislative Updates. See you next time. Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another Legislative Update. Thanks for watching.